Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the Scarborough Rouge debate on the environment. I'm Charlotte Craig. I'm the online coordinator for Wildlands League. Today, we're going to hear directly from candidates on important questions that focus on climate change, protecting nature, water, pollution, and local concerns. This debate is a part of the 100 Debates on the Environment Initiative, a national non-partisan movement coordinated by GreenPAC. This specific debate is organized by Wildlands League, a non-for-profit charity working to protect at least half of Canada's irreplaceable nature. A recording of this event will be made available through Wildlands League YouTube channel, so if you miss anything or want to share it with any fellow voters, that'll be available soon. So without further ado, panelists, please turn on your cameras and we'll get to introductions.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dolf Dejong. I'm the CEO of Your Toronto Zoo, nestled right in the middle of this riding. While we're all together virtually, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that I'm on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. If we could all take a moment to recognize the lands that you're on, wherever you're tuning in from. I'd like to take a moment to thank our friends at Wildlands League and our participants tonight for setting time aside to talk about this important issue. The mission at Your Toronto Zoo is connecting people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. And more than ever, with the changing climate and biodiversity loss, we need to understand where our leaders are coming from on these matters and what their plans are to ensure a brighter future for nature. So tonight, I'm so pleased that we have two of our four local candidates with us, Kingsley Kwok from the NDP, Gary Anandasangaree from the Liberals, and unfortunately, we had last-minute regrets from the People's Party of Canada, and the Conservative candidate was unable to participate. But we're grateful for our participants who have been able to come tonight. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Kingsley first for a 1-minute introduction and a bit of background. Over to you.
Thank you, Dolf, and thank you, Charlotte from the Wildlands League. My name is Kingsley Kwok. I was your NDP candidate in the last election. I am your NDP candidate in Scarborough Rouge Park. I am a full-time respiratory therapist in Scarborough, working in the emergency, intensive care, and children's department, helping patients suffering from COVID-19 in the past 18 months. I have represented allied health hospital professionals to fight for safe working conditions, including proper and adequate personal protection equipment. I supported public health efforts to encourage masking and hand hygiene in the beginning of the pandemic, and am encouraging vaccinations since the beginning of this year. I supported families who had loved ones in long-term care during the pandemic, fighting for emergency leave benefits and paid sick days, supporting young people as they advocate for climate action and better mental health services, speaking out against racism and Islamophobia. That's what I'm here to do during this election, and I will strive to be your representative in Parliament. I hope you can vote for me.
Thank you so much, Kingsley. Gary, over to you.
Thank you, Dolf. And I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of many Indigenous people and nations, and most recently, of course, the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to thank the Wildland League for organizing this, as well as GPAC for having a national presence and bringing environment into the forefront of this election. I want to thank Charlotte and yourself, Dolf, for moderating and to support this event. I'm pleased to be joined by Kingsley Kwok, the only candidate here today, the only other candidate here today, and someone who I have immense respect for. And I do want to acknowledge it at the outset, especially the work he's done during the pandemic. I am been elected twice as the Member of Parliament for this area. I've been serving the people of Scarborough Rouge Park for the past 6 years, and it's been my absolute honor to do so. I look forward to a very robust discussion today where we can outline many of the platform commitments of the Liberal Party, which will allow us to continue the work that we undertook in 2015, including the Rouge National Urban Park. So with that, I'll stop and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you for those introductions. And for our guests tuning in from home, we're going to ask a series of questions, and each of the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to those questions to help us gain an understanding of where each individual and their parties are coming from. So with that, I'm going to kick it off and have a question surrounding the global crisis on climate, nature, and the pandemic. So COVID-19 has brought to light the links between the climate crisis, human impact on nature, and the rise in global pandemics. Like SARS, Ebola, and nearly 3/4 of infectious diseases, scientists generally agree that COVID originated in other animal species and spread to humans in part because of pressures on these species brought about by land use changes and unsustainable consumption. These factors, as we know, are also leading to climate change. So we're looking for some yes or no answers from our candidates here about measures the government can take to address these crises to protect the health of Canadians as we emerge from the worst of this pandemic. So we're going to start off with you on this one, Gary, and we're going to ask you to keep your answer to a minute or less for the 3 questions. So starting off, will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land and freshwater ocean by 2030?
Yes. We've been working on this for a number of years, and we will continue to ensure that our land mass is protected, 30% of our land mass is protected by 2030. Currently, our target is 25% of the land mass by 2025, which is a significant increase from where we started off in 2015.
Thank you. And Gary, we'll stick with you for these next 2, and then we'll go to you, Kingsley. Would you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and make it law?
We've been working together as a government in order to ensure that we reduce carbon emissions significantly, and we're committed to net zero by 2050. Paris targets were set, and then we will exceed the Paris targets to below 50% of the 2005 levels in order to meet the Paris targets. And in fact, we will exceed those targets. And we will continue to work towards accelerating the greenhouse gas emissions towards 2050, where through incentives, through taxation, as well as in ensuring that our economy turns into a green economy over the next 2 decades.
Thank you for that. And one last piece, will you push your party's leadership to end all government subsidies for fossil fuels?
Yes, and we're very much committed to do so in the platform as outlined on our website. And I would be glad to elaborate on this later, but we are absolutely committed to eliminating all government subsidies towards fossil fuels.
Thank you for that. Kingsley, I'll go through them for you, starting with, will your party develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse the natural loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030?
Yes, absolutely. The NDP has it in our platform to say that we want to protect 30% of the land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030. In addition, we want to enforce the Species at Risk Act, and we want to further protect oceans and our freshwater, whether it is in the lakes and estuaries, like in our district in Scarborough Rouge Park, or in around our country from sea to sea to sea.
Thank you for that. And will you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and make it law?
Yes, yes. Our platform, if anybody is looking it up, is at www.ndp.ca/commitments, and it is absolutely in there. and we want to cut emissions by more than half, by 60%, and then meet the reduction of 1.5 degrees Celsius as in the Paris Agreement.
Thank you. And will you push your party's leadership to end all government subsidies for fossil fuels?
That is absolutely in our platform. Even during the pandemic, these companies were getting subsidies from these fossil fuel companies were getting subsidies from the government. We want to, the NDP, we want to stop that subsidy and then divert it into green jobs so that we can remediate and protect the environment and give good jobs to the unemployed and to the ones affected by the pandemic.
Thank you for that. And we'll stick with you for the next question, Kingsley. Will you and your party commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? And specifically, what would you do to address how women and other marginalized groups have been disproportionately affected by both the pandemic and our environmental crisis?
So I want to address this in our local terms, but also in the global terms, like we have already started talking. Locally, how the pandemic has affected Canadians or us in Toronto is that we have seen that we have a public health pandemic emergency, and at the same time, we have a climate change emergency. And so while during the pandemic, we have a lot of jobs being lost, a lot of companies firing long-term workers, and then other workers who have had to stay home to look after their children because their children are doing online schooling at home. A lot of women are stuck outside the workforce. While the pandemic, we are also seeing that there are vulnerable populations and hotspots, predominantly in racialized communities, newcomer communities who are suspicious and hesitant about vaccination. And so we have all those factors in, and during the pandemic, we are seeing all kinds of racism surfacing like never before. And then in terms of the global situation, we have seen that climate change is creating more and more droughts, not just in Canada or in America, but also in places like Guatemala or in Afghanistan. So it's causing either a migrant situation in Central America or wars and competition and atrocities in Central Asia. So I see that Dolf has flashed me the card and my time is up. But we need to work on both the public health emergency and the climate change emergency together.
Thank you for that. And Gary, the same question to you. Will you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? What would you do to address how women and other marginalized groups have been disproportionately affected by both the pandemic and our environmental crisis?
Absolutely. We've been working on ensuring that we have a society that ensures equal outcomes through multiple measures that we've put in place. But I think one of the most important aspects of our platform going forward is the $10 a day childcare. This is going to be transformational. It's going to create over 250,000 spots across Canada, and it will ensure that families, for example, in Toronto, will save on average of $19,000 per child who are in childcare, and that will be a game changer, particularly for women. We know that the recovery right now and the initial job losses indicate that there's a disproportionately higher number of women who have been affected because they're also teaching kids at home and other responsibilities. So this is going to be a very significant aspect of our recovery. We know that climate change, for example, will disproportionately affect Indigenous communities in the north, northern Canada. the Inuit population will be significantly affected because of the way of life will be forever altered in the Arctic as the temperature rises over time, and therefore we have an absolute urgency to ensure that we do stick to the plan that we put forward, and Canada goes on the right track towards ensuring that we address the climate emergency. I was parliamentary secretary when we developed the National Anti-Racism Strategy in 2015, and many elements that affect the Black community and others, we were able to address. And we know that with the pandemic, they've been disproportionately affected with health outcomes. And we will continue as a government to work to address those inequities, including healthcare for Indigenous people based on a distinctions-based approach.
Thank you for that. Shifting gears a little bit to talk about toxins in our environment. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is our overarching law to protect the health and environment of Canadians. The Act has not been significantly amended since 1999, despite major changes in our understanding of toxic substances in our environment. A recent bill introduced in the last Parliament did not make it past the first reading. Will you support getting this bill reintroduced, strengthened, and make it a top legislative priority? Gary, we'll stick with you.
Thanks, Dolf. And yes, this is already included in our platform where we say we will pass a strengthened Canadian Environmental Protection Act to protect everyone, including the most vulnerable to harm from toxic substances and those living in communities where exposure is high. It also recognizes the right to a healthy environment for the first time in Canadian law. By spring 2022, we'll move forward with a mandatory labeling of chemicals in consumer products, including cosmetic, cleaning products, and flame retardants in upholstery that may have harmful impacts on health and environment. And we'll increase testing of important products for compliance with Canadian standards to ensure that they're safe for Canadian consumers and Canadian producers are not at a disadvantage compared to others who are exporting goods to Canada.
Thank you for that. Kingsley, would you like the question again, or are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready to go. The bill that did not get passed is Bill C-18, I think. No, Bill C-28. Bill C-28. So yes, the NDP has it in our policy platform to strengthen the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Like we have said, from everyday products like toxins in cosmetics to environmental assessments on opening any new coal mines or any mine expansions. The NDP is also looking to get tough on big polluters, enforcing large oil companies to pay and clean up on inactive wells. And so just on cleaning inactive wells alone, that is an example of cleaning up the environment and still create jobs for workers.
Thank you for that. Okay, on to our fourth question, which surrounds Indigenous rights. There's no question Indigenous people play a critical role in environmental solutions. Will you implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And will you invest in Indigenous-led land use planning and the establishment of Indigenous protected and conservation areas? Kingsley, how about you start us off?
Thank you, Dolf, for that question. My leader, Jagmeet Singh, has been visiting northern communities and Indigenous communities in the first week and a half of the campaign period, highlighting issues, whether it is on truth and reconciliation or to access to clean water and better infrastructure in Indigenous communities. So yes, we want to work with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities on investing in land use planning and establishing protected and conserved areas. The NDP and myself, I am fully committed to the implementation of the United Nations UNRIP, and also the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Thank you, Kingsley. And Gary, will you implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and calls to action as per the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And will you invest in an Indigenous-led land use planning and the establishment of Indigenous protective and conservation areas?
Absolutely, Dolf. Let me just preface this by saying that my last 3 years as a member of parliament and the last year and a half as parliamentary secretary on Crown Indigenous Relations, my most important task was the passage of Bill C-15, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I worked with former NDP MP Romeo Sagnash and current MP Leah Gazan in order for its passage. It was a very painful process, but one that we were able to do in June of this year. The next part of UNDRIP is implementation, making sure our laws, all Canadian laws, are in line with the principles of the United Nations of Bill C-15, and making sure that we have a review and actual action plan that will ensure that our laws are in compliance. This includes environmental protection laws as well. With respect to the TRC calls to action, all 94 of them, our government is fully committed to implementing every single one of those calls to action. We have now implemented or in the process of implementing 80% of the calls to action that are in the domain of the federal government. They're started or well in the way or completed, and we will continue until every single one of those calls to action are complete. I do want to add a third element to this, which is the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the calls to justice. It's a very important element of reconciliation, and our government is committed, and we have committed significant amount of resources towards addressing the calls to justice, and the action plan was released about 2 months ago by Minister Bennett. With respect to environmental sustainability and land use planning for Indigenous people, we are focused on the notion of self-determination, one that allows and enables and empowers Indigenous nations and communities and peoples to be able to have control over their land, their resources, and as a result, is something that we are absolutely committed to. The Prime Minister has been steadfast in ensuring that we walk towards a path of reconciliation, but that also is underpinned by the notion of self-determination for all Indigenous peoples.
Thank you for that. Gary, will your party join the All-Party Climate Caucus to work collaboratively with MPs from across the aisle on policy solutions?
Yes, absolutely. And I was I founded what's called the Liberal Party Human Rights Caucus, and as part of that caucus, one of the major advocacy issues we've had was about Indigenous issues internationally, particularly with respect to corporate social responsibility, where Canadian companies oftentimes would be violating human rights of Indigenous peoples, and this is something that I worked on. My colleague John McKay next door in Scarborough Guildwood is a champion. He's brought introduced legislation to that effect. So we will continue as caucus members, as party members, to support any initiative that will advance climate change, the fight against climate change, and I commit to do so today.
Thank you for that. And Kingsley, over to you. Will you join the All-Party Climate Caucus to work collaboratively with MPs from across the aisle on policy solutions?
Yes, I will work with anyone who is committed and seriously to bringing about meaningful change in environmental protection and climate action. That's a no-brainer. It is for my current generation, but also for future generations.
Thank you for that. Going from the global climate change to our more local backyard in our beautiful Rouge National Urban Park, It's such an important ecological corridor connecting our lake with the moraine. It's the home to 2,000 plus species, and 7 million Canadians live within an hour's drive of this incredible natural resource. It's been an important refuge for many, especially during the pandemic, and is a key part of our work at your Toronto Zoo with endangered species such as Blanding's turtle being released there in collaboration with our friends at Parks Canada, the Conservation Authority, and other partners. So my question for you, Kingsley, is will you invest in expanding the Rouge National Urban Park further by adding pickering lands? And will you further support the creation of a near-urban nature network across the Golden Horseshoe?
New Democrats are committed to building and expanding urban national parks. So yes, I would be committed. Pickering lands is has been, I think, has been a federal election issues in the Greater Toronto Area. I think, as far as I can remember, whether it, so as far as I can remember, would be 1988 or 1993. So because of that, and because I think the city of Pickering was trying to attract Amazon, there are local stakeholders that if I'm so lucky to be elected member of parliament, we will have to consult with. But the short answer to your question, yes, a New Democratic Party is committed to expanding urban national parks.
Does that include the creation of a near urban nature network across the Golden Horseshoe for you?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you for that. And Gary, over to you. Will you invest in expanding the Rouge by adding the Pickering lands and also support the near urban nature network across the GTA?
Absolutely, and on both fronts, Dolf. I am absolutely committed to ensuring that we expand available public spaces that both protects the environment but also gives communities access to nature. With respect to the Rouge National Urban Park, the Pickering lands are long overdue for some resolution. They've been, as of next year, it will be 50 years since the federal government took over the land towards the airport that never got built, and in fact the business case for the airport has waned over the years, and I believe that it will make a very important addition to the current framework of the Rouge National Urban Park. The management plan for the park has been passed. The management board has been, advisory board has been appointed. And as you're well aware, Dolf, we were able to transfer the provincial lands after 2016 when we took government, expand the park from 2 square kilometers to now 79.1 square kilometers. And we are absolutely determined and resolved to expand the park. And on a personal level, I will do whatever I can to encourage the expansion into the Pickering lands. And I know the Waterfront Generation Trust, for example, have written to Minister Wilkinson, and we will work with the local stakeholders to ensure that. And also, urban parks have now become part of our platform. We committed to it just before the election. There's 7 urban parks that are in the early stages, but I know my MP colleagues from different parts of different parties want to park in Windsor, they want to park in Saskatoon, they want to park in Halifax, and so on. So this is something that is a model that we've created in locally. You're very much a part of that, Dolf, and you know what an amazing place it is, and it is something that will be the gift that we give to future generations. So I'm very grateful for this question.
Yeah, and we're very grateful to be here in the Rouge to get to share it with our community and see this concept of a conservation precinct in this part of the Greater Toronto Area taking root and connecting people to that natural world. We know it's good for their mental health, and we're so excited to be part of that at your zoo. So we have a few questions that have been actually submitted by registrants. So Gary, I'm going to stick with you. How soon does your party expect Canada's economy to be switched from fossil fuel based to renewable clean energy based?
It's a process, and what I can tell you is that we are absolutely committed to ensuring that we reach the 2050 target, net zero 2050 target at this point. But we know that Scotland is coming up later in the fall, where we may have to up our game. And I think we are committed to working with the international community to that effect. On a local level, we see the changes taking place already. You know about the Rouge share gas plant just across beside the Rouge National Urban Park is a very important aspect of it. Developing, transitioning the economy into cleaner jobs, whether it's through home retrofits, through electric vehicle charging stations across Canada, or even saying that we will not sell fossil fuel based vehicles, consumer vehicles after 2035, all indicate that we are in a transition right now. We know that places like Alberta and Saskatchewan are very heavily dependent on fossil fuels, and we have a responsibility, and we owe it to all Canadians to make sure that we do that transition and transition properly, which includes investing in jobs, investing in training that will allow people to be able to transition into those cleaner jobs. So we will continue as a government, and our commitment here is to absolutely work with industry, including the power sector, to have the cleanest form of power that's available, and to make sure that our economy transitions to a green economy over the next decade leading up to net zero by 2050.
Thank you, Gary. And Kingsley, over to you. How soon does your party expect Canada's economy to be switched from fossil fuel-based to renewable clean energy-based?
It's in our New Democratic Party's commitment, our policy platform. We want to have a net zero electricity to power Canada by 2030. So that means addressing high carbon emission projects in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But I just want to remind viewers that even burning coal to generate electricity is still the case in Alberta, Saskatchewan, but also New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So there is a lot of work to be done with provinces on that transition. And then on other more local level, we want to encourage zero emission vehicles. So whether it is by expanding that in the federal sector, like in crown agencies like Canada Post. By the way, even in America, President Biden is going over on that route. But being here in Scarborough, we also want to look at converting any automotive plants that has been shut down, like the one in Oshawa, to transition that to producing more zero emission vehicles, and encouraging charging stations and purchasing made in Canada zero emission electric vehicles. There's also clean energy projects that the NDP wants to encourage communities to operate, and whether it's through incentives or subsidies, and then in general, giving incentives to retrofit, whether it is buildings or transitioning diesel fuel freight vehicles to zero emission vehicles.
Thank you for that. Coming a little closer to home again, Kingsley, starting with you, what are you planning to do with the invasive plants that are drying out our ponds, rivers, and forests? And I think, you know, anybody who's been in the Rouge has seen the dog strangling vine, the Phragmites, the history with species such as purple loosestrife. What does your party plan to do to help address those challenges?
It's a really, this really is at the local level. Is once an invasive plant species take hold, is really difficult to eradicate. So once we can monitor it, report it and then start eliminating it, that's the way. But even at the level of elimination, do we do it manually? Do we do it mechanically, or do we do it chemically? Because using herbicides may require either a ministry approval or really stringent monitoring. So we want to also attack it at stopping any imports of invasive species that shouldn't be here, and then encouraging gardeners to grow local, and also everybody to buy local firewood. And there are a lot of consumer decisions that we want to encourage, and even something like cleaning up our pets, cleaning up our gear, watching how we eliminate mud, things like that, and even watching how we compost, and whether we actually have to bag invasive species instead of leaving it in the compost in the backyard. There's a far range of solutions that we have to look at.
Thank you for that. And Gary, how would you plan to manage the invasive species that we're finding in our watersheds?
The Rouge watershed is obviously managed primarily by Parks Canada, and why my suggestion is that we work with Parks Canada and other community groups to remove the invasive species. It is part of the mandate of Parks Canada to ensure the ecological integrity of the park and its lands. We need to invest in planting native species. We do have a commitment to plant 2 billion trees across Canada, and I know that even this year we saw Ontario Forestry, for example, work with parks to plant those trees, around 40,000 this year alone. And we'll continue to work with Parks Canada and local groups to monitor the ponds, rivers, and forests to ensure we remove species before they get out of hand. And the great thing about the Rouge Park is we have the Rouge National Urban Park, the Parks Canada folks, but we also have a very vibrant and robust group of citizens who have made it their life mission to ensure that the environment is protected and our watershed is clean. And I count on them. I rely on them and their leadership. As a federal government, we will support and fund them, and as we have in the past, to work with them to ensure that we address invasive species in our area.
Thank you for that. One of our beliefs here at your zoo is that conservation is a team sport and we need more players. And we're grateful to both of you for being players and sharing our commitment to protecting these natural environments for future generations. We're grateful to those who joined us on the call this evening, showing their commitment to the environment, pushing that agenda forward, and in many cases, recognizing the names active in our community on the ground and advocating for these precious spaces. So thank you to all of you for participating. And with that, I'm going to kick it back to you, Charlotte, to wrap things up.
Thank you everyone for participating today. And again, thank you all for the attended. A reminder that this event was recorded. It'll be available soon, so just keep a lookout in your emails and on your social media. And we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you again, guys.